All right, welcome everyone to the second Leading Patriots webinar. Today I'm really excited to be joined by three experts in the food, restaurant, and beverage industry, and we're going to be talking about how that industry has been facing just an enormous amount of disruption and what the future of this industry looks like and how these gentlemen are leading their organizations through it. I'm your host, so to speak, Brett Josephson. I'm an associate professor of marketing in the School of Business, and I'm the director of executive development. So with that, I want to just provide a brief overview of what this series is about. I'll then introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over actually to my colleague, Gautam Vadakapat, who is an assistant professor of marketing and the executive director of our retail center. So before we do get into this, I do want to call out and thank Sumit Srivastava, who's the president-elect of the Alumni Association, a school business alumni, big proponent of the university. This series was an idea that Sumit and I had several weeks ago to give a voice to prominent patriots, friends of Mason, who are going through challenges and struggles in their industry, and to give a platform for people to speak to other Mason grads, to speak to the alumni, to speak to people around Mason, to say this is how our industry is being impacted and how we are moving it forward. It wouldn't have been possible to get this done without the help of Jennifer Robinson and Michelle Murphy from the Advancement Alumni Association, who came together with executive development to create this series. So a little bit about just the agenda, just a quick overview once again for me, then we're going to move into the conversation with the panelists. Dwight Fuller, who's a managing partner at Great American Restaurants. Justin Cox, 2009 graduate from the law school, who's the founder and CEO of Atlas Brew Works, and then Chef Paul Magnet, who is an instructor within George Mason University and also has run several successful restaurants over his career. And so with that, I just want to give a little bit about George Mason, the executive development. We, along with the Alumni Association, have really made partnerships in the last several weeks, the last several months, to be the bridge from the time that you graduate from George Mason University till the end of your career. We want to be there to help fill the skills gap, the knowledge gap, the capabilities that you need to continue to expand and have the career impact you're wanting to have. And so we do this through a series of programmings, offerings. And one of the things that I'm passionate about as I've stepped into this role over the last year is to recognize that we are there for you as alumni, that we will provide talent and expertise back to the faculty that you had, a number of industries, number of contacts. But to give you the skills and techniques and capabilities that you need to thrive within your own career. A little bit about Alumni Association as well. Once again, they're a great partner for this. Big thing that I want to pull out here, obviously there's over 200,000 Mason alumni. Make sure that you tap into that network, and one of the best ways to tap into that network is through the Alumni Association. You have local chapters through either physical locations or cities that you're in. You also have them through the colleges that you graduated in or the units that you graduated from. There are real benefits to tapping this network and seeing how it can impact your career. The research that we've done in our graduate programs in the School of Business, when you ask somebody why they're getting an MBA or graduate degree, it usually comes into two things. I want to get promoted in my current job, or I want to change industries. That's usually why somebody gets a degree. But if we ask them 5 years later, what was the value in your degree, they always come back to the network, the classes, the cohorts that they built, and the relationships they built. And that's something that I am proud of, that as Mason, we take seriously, that we want to be there and foster these relationships with you as you go through your careers. So let me do a little bit more formal introduction of our panelists as we move on. So Dwight Fuller, once again, managing partner at Great American Restaurants. He operates, manages the Aussie restaurants in Fairfax. I'm sure many of us have actually been to. We were telling Dwight that both Gautam and I eat there quite regularly in our work and personal life, and one of our favorite things. Before the webinar, Dwight was giving us this really interesting history. Grew up in Germany. Spent a lot of time bouncing around Europe as a teen and as an adult, and had a great conversation about what it was like to kind of have this international experience. Big supporter of the university, big supporter of what Mason's trying to do. We really appreciate Dwight being on the call. Next, Justin Cox. So he got his JD from George Mason in 2009. So Tennessee guy, obviously probably somebody who's either a a volunteer or went to Vanderbilt. And what's really amazing hearing his story was, started out in some of the home brewing, developed a passion for the brew industry, for the beer industry, and started his own company. And this is something we're seeing more and more Mason Patriots getting into in both the beer and wine industry, and has created Atlas Brewworks, one of the most kind of up and coming cool beer companies that you can have in the DC capital region. So thank you, Justin, for joining us. And then lastly, we have Chef Paul Magnet. Chef, I hope this is correct. I couldn't find a lot of information about your bio, but I found a book that I think you published in 2005, and so I pulled the bio from this. Paul has an amazing history when you actually start to study and look at what he's done. He's obviously been involved with the hospitality group within George Mason University, teaching here, has an illustrious career as a chef all over the world. Back in my old haunts in Seattle, Washington, was nice to see that Paul was at and doing different things, been really involved with the food and beverage industry. So as you can see, we have three incredibly knowledgeable panelists about what this industry has gone through and what it is going to look like into the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gotham, to take it from here.
I had myself on mute, so I'm sure none of you heard the introduction. I was just going to say thank you, Brett, for the introduction. Thank you for all the panelists for taking time off. My job here is to facilitate this conversation about how COVID-19 has changed the landscape and to highlight how industry players are navigating this change. So I'm just going to be a silent person in this, but for the audience, what I wanted to do is to kind of set the stage, just for those who are not into the food and beverage industry, kind of talk about how important this industry is for the economy in general. And so for the retail industry, the restaurant industry accounts for roughly 700 to 800 billion dollars, and was projected to make $899 billion in sales by the end of 2020. Obviously, COVID had a very different perspective on that. And it employs over 13 million people, and it is projected to employ over 15 million people by 2020, again, before COVID had an impact. Now, before we talk about COVID, I thought I would turn the platform over to you to kind of talk about your company, the genesis behind the company, how you got here, to kind of set the stage for the following discussion. So we'll probably go with Dwight, Justin, and then Paul in that order, if that works. And just take a few minutes to talk about your company and what your plans were before COVID occurred.
So, Great American Restaurants, we've been around for 45 years now in the DC metropolitan area. Our first restaurant was actually Pico's, which was right down the street from George Mason. Our founders really wanted to get into the community quickly because they saw that it was starting to flourish. And we now operate 17 restaurants, a bakery, and we employ over 2,000 people. We were voted top places to work in the Washington Post for 5 years running. And we just got the same award from the Washington Business Journal. We're really proud to be a part of Mason and helping shape the future of such great young talent. It's our way of paying back because usually when we are open, over 50% of our staff is Mason students. So we have a pretty solid connection. We have, I think it's close to 4, maybe 5 financial managers that were graduates from Mason. Our vice president of finance is a Mason alum, and John Norton, the CEO, did spend his last year of his graduate degree at Mason. So a lot of ties there. You know, we're fortunate to be in an area that has been insulated by a lot of economic downturns. This is one of those times that's not the case. This has impacted everybody. As we move into the future, I think we've demonstrated as an organization, I think every organization had to, is to be, how to be so agile and completely change our business model. We usually take, you know, a good year, maybe even 2 to develop a concept. We developed 3 concepts in less than 2 weeks. We switched our business model to primarily curbside and pickup in the beginning, and we just recently were able to open outside. All of the business that we're doing right now is purely just to survive. We're not making any money. When we first learned that we were having to close, probably the most painful thing I've ever gone through in my career was telling my staff that they didn't have a job anymore. So in doing that, we still took care of them. We basically shared with them all of our working knowledge on how to make sure that they continued to be financially solvent through this, utilizing everything that the government had to offer. These kids had no way of knowing how to navigate that stuff, and we held their hand through it. And I can say that, you know, I don't think very few of them were negatively impacted to any large degree. It certainly hurt them, but it wasn't to the degree that it could have. We provided free meals for all of our staff that wanted to come by every day, both lunch and dinner. They were allowed to take as many meals as they wanted. We also reached out to the community, and we continue to do so by donating thousands and thousands of meals a week and delivering them to the first responders and some of those who are less fortunate. So we're right there in the community, trying to do the right thing, and love Mason because they've always demonstrated that also.
Let me unmute myself again. I was going to say, Dwight, we'll have to pick the points that you raised in a little bit further detail in the next few minutes. But what it sounded like was you were going gangbusters before COVID-19 came along and threw an unprecedented curveball to the way you operate businesses. And it also sounds like you reacted very quickly and in an appropriate manner. Is that a fair summary of how Great American Restaurants did?
Yeah, I think it was very eye-opening to us quickly that we had to really help our staff get through the process of navigating all of the things that they had available to them. And as a result of that, I think they were able to be healthy and fairly happy through this, where a lot of places in the country and a lot of places in Virginia, that did not happen for one reason or another. And, you know, the one thing that, you know, we just spent a fortune on a restaurant concept with 3 restaurants in it. And that's something that, you know, we did not see coming, obviously.
All right, thank you. Justin, would you mind talking a little bit about Atlas Brewery, and similar to what Dwight said, you know, how things were going and how things have changed, and then we'll get Paul's opinion as well, and then we'll segue into how each of your companies are actually dealing with the employees and customers and trying to help them go through this difficult time.
Sure, yeah. So Atlas Brewworks, we've been around since September of 2013, so coming up a few months away from our 7th anniversary. As I mentioned in the intro, I started the brewery up out of just a passion and love for beer. I was a pretty big beer nerd and home brewer. Way back in 2013, there was, I think, 3,500 breweries across the U.S. Now there's about 8,000 or so. So the growth in the industry has been pretty crazy, and we were sort of in the, I guess, the second wave of that. But we have two facilities. Our main production facility is in Northeast DC and West Virginia Avenue. It's a solar-powered facility as well, which I should mention. We got a big environmental ethos at Atlas and try to integrate that into a lot of our practices. We have a tap room here at Ivy City as well, so people can come in and have beers and flights and pints. And we do not have a kitchen, so we source food from outside or let people bring their food in. And our business model is kind of twofold in that we focus both on brewing for production, for putting our beer into cans for sales to grocery and liquor stores, and beer into kegs to go to people like Dwight and his restaurants all across DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia, and a little bit in Tennessee. And then I mentioned we have the tap room part of it, which I consider our retail portion of the business, which is just consumers directly coming into to the brewery, having some beers, sharing our story and the experience of what Atlas is. And we have a second location, which is on Half Street Southeast in DC, which is about 400 feet away from the center field gates of Nationals Baseball Park, which we pushed and worked day and night, pulled in every favor we could to get the thing open on time for the opening of baseball season, which we were ready to do. And then, of course, COVID happened and kind of, dramatically changed everything. So that space is open for takeout and deliveries only currently. But yeah, in terms of just how we've had to react, we're a little bit fortunate in that we do have, our income stream is diversified, that we sell both to bars, restaurants, grocery stores, and then direct to customers on site. And that, of course, that retail on site business just dried up immediately when quarantine happened, as well as our draft beer business, because of all of our bar and restaurant partners were closed as well. Fortunate that we were still able to sell cans of beer, although, the amount of cans versus our total sales is smaller than necessary to keep everything running. But yeah, and similar to Dwight, we had to figure out pretty quickly. We were really counting on the income stream from our tap rooms. Those weren't open, so what do we do? And stood up a curbside pickup model in about 36 hours or so. They added delivery a few days after that. And then most recently with the phase 1 reopening in DC, which only allows outdoor dining, so we can have patrons on our patio. But I think we were told by the mayor that that was going to happen on a Wednesday, and the date was Friday when that was able to be open last Friday. So again, we had to completely turn around and try to figure out how to get practices in order, get reservation systems in order, something we've never really had to deal with before, and just completely changed the service model of, rather than people walking up to the bar and ordering beers, to us, flipping that around and doing kind of a more traditional table service model.
So it looks like the common theme, and I haven't heard Paul speak as yet, but it looks almost right that the common theme across is agility. Like, you have to be quick to respond and you have to be fast to respond. And both of you have so far been able to do that despite what seems to be day-to-day changes in the environment as to when reopening happens and how reopening happens and so forth. But Justin, I just want to touch upon one thing that I thought was something that I hadn't heard before, that your brewery is solar powered. Did I hear that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So is this something that you guys are passionate about, or is this something that you like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We proudly talk about that a lot, and it's on all of our cans. So we've got a 68 kilowatt solar array on the roof, providing our electricity. We have many more environmental practices. Like, we have some water reclamation systems, so we can minimize the amount of water that we're using. We partner with local farmers for our spent grain, which is a byproduct of our brewing process that could go to a landfill, but rather than that, we give it to farmers so they can supplement their animal feed with it. We have some of our cans which have a shrink sleeve on them. We just recently worked with our can manufacturer. We found out that those actually weren't able to be recycled. They would get kicked out of the recycling stream because of that plastic sleeve. So worked with them on a solution to now all of our sleeved cans have a little kind of serration and tab on it that you can rip off and then take the plastic off of the can, and then having the underlying can thus be recycling. So I mean, just being environmental stewards is important to us as a company, and breweries themselves are pretty energy intensive entities. So anything that we can do to help offset that, I think, is the right thing.
That's awesome. And hopefully the third location is going to be close to Mason.
We'll see. Let's get the second one open first.
Well, that should open soon, right? Well, Paul, it's your turn to jump in and talk a little bit about yourself and the companies you've been affiliated with.
Okay, I wear two hats in this conversation, and big shout out to Dwight, because he walks the talk when it comes to supporting students. Dwight's been a visitor in many of my courses, and he brings a great deal of reality and purpose to the students, and to helping relate what we're studying and how it's actually going to be used when they go to work. And that's a wonderful thing to have, as well as to demonstrate to them it's an incredible career path that is very enriching. And we thank Dwight and Great American Restaurants for everything they do to help support us. It's above and beyond. It really is. And they are a quality organization, one we're happy to be affiliated with. So I'll start with, as an educator, and my employer is George Mason University now. So let me talk a little bit of how we have envisioned the impact long-term on students in the hospitality field. And I know that's a broad field, but I think it's appropriate to address it in that platform. So the first thing we had to do was move 5,500 courses that were being taught in the classroom to online within 10 days, a monumental feat. And, you know, we are lucky that Mason's such a quality organization. The resources were allocated, the help that instructors needed to do this that maybe weren't familiar with online delivery, and it went very, very well. I think we were waiting for the shoe to drop, and it never did. Likewise, our students were very mature and understanding and compliant, and so it worked. In keeping with the philosophy of keeping our students and staff safe, the university elected to maintain that position for the summer term. Now, there's a couple things that came out of this. As many universities started evaluating and researching what's going to happen to enrollment, just as it might for operators to look at staffing. What we found was that summer enrollments were predicted to be increased nominally, because students weren't working. They didn't have viable work options or internship options, which was the typical path during the summer. So our enrollment during the summer is up. I know that in our department, we've added a significant amount of courses for the summer that we didn't normally offer. And our fill rates in each of the courses were above historical numbers. Now that leads me to the fall, which is less optimistic. Depending on what research you read, the fall enrollment is forecasted to be somewhere, again, depending on which research you read, between 10 and 25% down. So you can make your own conclusions from what that means to the industry. It means that we won't be delivering graduates until a little bit later, to the tune of whatever the decrease in enrollment is, which would create a gap in our immediate regional environment. Many students are considering taking a gap year, and what they do with that gap year is fairly splintered, whether they're going to travel, whether they're going to just work, but they don't want to take classes online. They really thrive in a face-to-face environment. So there is an indication in the research that they're going to be possibly taking a gap year. And the other thing I want to tell you is that whether you're in industry or education, the phrase right now being used that I hear so much is tendency to pivot. And in the hospitality industry, we probably intuitively do that. I'm sure Justin and Dwight would support me in saying, while you may have an idea of what every day is going to bring you, I guarantee you, you're going to be pivoting each day due to internal or external influences, staffing, food supply, whatever it is. Research shows that the average hospitality manager answers 93 yes or no questions per hour.
Wow.
It's that type of quick thinking, that pivoting on your feet. So fortunately in the hospitality industry, this has always been what we do. Whether it's in the kitchen, the dining room, the bar, event management. Justin, you're in a hybrid situation where you're manufacturing and you're retailing. So the tendency to pivot is quite high. So we develop students that are very comfortable with change, very comfortable with thinking on their feet and being flexible. So that's my education hat, telling you a little bit about, and I'll put my sticky note up here, a little bit about what's happening. In the industry, what we saw come out of the COVID-19 crisis is, first of all, a complete shutdown. And at that point, you're probably going into a type of austerity mode. How can you contain losses? How can you do the best you can for your people, as Dwight was saying with his employees? And then how can you protect the integrity of your brand? And I think Dwight gave a perfect checklist when he talked about what happened during that process time. Justin, I'm sure you did the same thing, but we haven't talked about it yet as a group. So this tendency to pivot, one thing we saw develop was a phrase called a ghost kitchen. And a ghost kitchen is basically where you are in the old days, I guess we call it a commissary. You don't have seating, you don't have any exchange point for the guest to receive their product and pay for their product. It happened through delivery or curbside. And you had companies like Famous Dave's, Chick-fil-A, Let Us Entertain You, all had ghost kitchens that might have been preparing sauces or prepackaged prepared foods that would simply be heated up on site during regular production. But now we're producing finished product, and delivery companies like DoorDash and Grubhub and people like that would come and pick up from the ghost kitchen. The customer never knew it. And that way they contain cost going into it. I'm also, and the audience doesn't know this, but I'm also certified and have several years as a health inspector. I'm going to tell you about a few things that are being spoken about in the environmental health arenas for the future, somewhere probably in the next 2 to 5 years. There's a discussion taking place about any type of open food service, such as a salad bar or a buffet. So now there is a discussion about how those can be made safer, given that the safety of what happens on a buffet is largely driven by the customers who use it. So I'll give you the example. You have mature adults going through that are careful. They don't mix utensils between products, and they do one thing at a time. They take a fresh plate every time they go there. But what about the 7-year-old kid with a runny nose? who goes up to it and then just wants to put their hand on the buffet and touch everything along the side. So there's probably going to be some new regulation coming out in the future about how buffets and salad bars are set up and how self-service is mechanically engineered for the guest to make selections on a self-service food bar in some way. The other thing is that you might see a difference in the front of the house. Something more extreme, although I don't know that this is going to happen, but we know that gloves, some type of plastic or latex glove, is a common use in the back of the house or heart of the house, where employees are touching any ready-to-eat food. They have to use a glove or they have to use a utensil. The general rule of thinking is, if the next stop for that food item is someone's mouth, you're not allowed to use your bare hands. You have to use gloves or a utensil. And that's for safety. But you might see servers wearing gloves in the future. If they are getting bread out of a bread warmer to take to a plate, if in some restaurants the servers are responsible for actually producing a dessert and then delivering it to the table where the kitchen doesn't, there are some food operations that operate in that way. You might actually see latex gloves being worn by the service staff in order to provide an even greater sense of food safety in regards to that. And then lastly, I think there's a learning curve that everybody has experienced, and we're going to sort through the successes and the not so successful experiences when you shift from closing to takeout to curb service back to full service. And I'd be interested to hear from Dwight or Justin what they've learned and what may possibly be part of the new normal in their operations. I'll close with my mantra with all students in any class that has a financial application, whether it's cost controls or accounting, is that every decision you make is a financial one. Every decision you make in an operation has a financial impact, whether you're the supervisor in charge of scheduling, whether you are the manager in charge of procurement, whether you are in charge of reservations in the dining room, and I could go on. That every decision you make has a financial impact that can be seen at the end of the month based on what you decide to do as a manager. And so think about what you do. Think about what the impact will be, because at the end of the day, if the operation is not solvent and at least a break even, it won't be there tomorrow. Furthermore, if there are owners involved, owners are not going to be satisfied with a break-even situation for very long. They require profits. Profits are their return for risk in investing in the operation. So I think I've talked long enough. I'm really interested to hear about the feedback.
Yeah, so actually you also set us up very, very nicely for the next sequence of questions, which is, as you put it, Paul, is like, well, one is this tendency to pivot, right? And the second is, what learnings have you taken away from this moving forward? And so maybe we can use the next time. So this is just statistics that kind of states the obvious. With the COVID, we have seen that year-to-year changes in seated restaurant diners has almost gone to zero, and it's probably going to start picking up soon. But I want to take the time now to kind of maybe start with Justin to talk about, hey, what were the things that you did to pivot when this happened? I heard, Justin, you say curbside. Were there other things? And like, what did you do with regards to the employees, if you did anything? And then talk about the learnings from this whole, like, how would you implement this into your business model? Like the learnings that you have from this event, how would you implement that into your business model moving forward? So maybe Justin, Dwight, and then Paul, you can synthesize these things based on your question. Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, starting with employees. So very, very similar to what Dwight said, you know, we were not at a financial place where we could sustain our in total payroll. So we ended up having to let go most of our tap room staff and cutting the hours back pretty severely on our production staff, and a few furloughs from sales employees also. But it was a big point for me to make sure that we were helping people navigate that kind of tumultuous time. So I was doing a lot of research of you know, what the unemployment system looks like in DC, helping people navigate the, you know, system that feels like it was built in 1958 before the internet existed. And then they were having a lot of trouble with getting rejections. I was helping them kind of contact the office from my end and walk through to that. Also looking from Atlas's perspective about what financial resources were out there in terms of grants from the local government, the PPP loans that are out there, and just doing everything, you know, best we could, like, to help people maintain their financial solvency and sanity throughout this. On a business perspective, I mean, day one where everything shut down, as I mentioned before, you know, our draft business just went down to zero. Nobody was open to serve draft beers at bars. So we had our production schedule planned and lots of beers in process that were destined to go into kegs that would normally fulfill our orders. So we had to reschedule everything and shift beers that we could into cans, find sales channels for those cans, and also ramp up our supply chain for those cans. So, you know, we're holding inventory for a certain period of time, expecting a certain amount of sales. That dramatically changed, and so we had to adapt on that front. And then, you know, as I mentioned before, on the retail side, pivoting over to starting curbside and starting a delivery service. And we had just changed our point of sale system about 2 weeks before all this happened also. So we were having to learn how that works, as well as kind of as stand up these two new businesses. And luckily the POS we were using was pretty integrated with those, or was designed with those sort of systems in mind already. So that helped us out quite a bit.
So just a quick couple of things that you raised that kind of caught my interest. One, you said you had to find new sales channels. How did you go about doing that in this time? Like, that seems
yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's probably more accurate to say, you know, how do we enlarge the sales channels that we already have? So, for instance, in DC, we sell most of our core brands of beer to giant stores and Safeway stores.
Mm-hmm.
So getting on with them, number one, just making sure that their shelves are stocked and that, you know, our distributors are doing their job and getting the product to the shelf so the customer can grab it. But working with them also of, you know, seeing, hey, will you allow us to come in and do a floor display at the end cap, or, you know, what kind of in-store marketing can we do to you know, increase our presence on the sales floor there, so that will hopefully translate into sales from consumers.
And the other question that kind of popped to my mind is that you talked about ramp up the supply chain, especially when it comes to moving to cans, I assume. How was that possible? Like, did you face significant challenges in adjusting your supply chain?
So mainly on our aluminum cans. So, you know, those have a specific lead time to them. There was a small increase in demand across the board for to-go beer in cans versus, you know, what normally go in draft. So our entire industry, and including, I'm sure, all the soft drink companies, everybody who puts something in aluminum, and now that the grocery stores were going crazy with everyone stocking up for quarantine, that has put a lot of pressure on, you know, all the way down that supply chain to the aluminum manufacturers. So we were, you know, working as quickly as we could to figure out what our actual needs were and, you know, try to project what we're going to actually need, talking with our manufacturers and getting into their queues, you know, trying to figure out on their end, are they expecting to have any shortages and when is that happening? And also, you know, balancing the cash flow aspect of that too. I'm sure all the can manufacturers would be very happy to take my money immediately and then send me cans, you know, whenever they feel like it. And the other side of that is, you know, if I'm not sending them a check, then they're not going to put me in line to have some cans made. So just trying to keep that communication open to make sure that we're managing that whole process as best as we can.
So, and before I ask Dwight, and if any of you have questions for Justin, feel free to jump in. But you brought up an interesting point, Justin, was communications and between your supply chain. Like, so did this change how you talk to your suppliers and so forth? And was there all of a sudden a greater degree of collaboration and partnership between players in your supply chain?
Absolutely. And I was pretty proactive. And as soon as we realized how big of a problem this was going to be, I was on the phone with most of our vendors and just kind of explaining, hey, this is the situation. Just want to be upfront and honest with you, asking for extended terms on some outstanding payments already, explaining to them, that we are still going to be brewing beer. It's going to be a lot lower volume than it would have been. We still need your supplies, your services, and working through them with that. And I think that built up a lot of goodwill along that supply chain. There's most everybody was pretty accommodating as much as they were financially able to too. This problem's pervasive outside of just our industry. So I think the interesting side on the real estate front is that's been a little bit more challenging. And understand why, our landlord has a mortgage he has to pay, and he's counting on our rent to pay his mortgage. And he was not willing or really able to do any alterations of our arrangement until his bank was on board. And I think his bank was sitting back and waiting to see what the federal government was going to supply in terms of help to them. So that whole process locked up pretty quickly. But we have kind of a small mom and pop landlord in one location and a big institutional REIT in another. And they both, have different things available to them and at their disposal, different mechanisms. But they both been good to work through this time with.
Excellent. Well, what it also tells you is that we're all in it together, right? And what you just said is the unintended consequences. Like, you don't think about how real estate and banking and all of that are kind of tied together in the government until you see all of this play out jointly over a period of time. Dwight, what has your experiences been with regards to pivoting? You talked a little bit about it, and also your major learnings or takeaway from this process.
One of the things that I've spoken about a number of times with a number of people is the idea of having core values. And in crisis, sticking with your core values is something that has been so impressive about our organization. It's really given us the ability to get a lot done really fast and do it with integrity and do it with pride. And having people around you that understand that, regardless of the situation, if they appreciate your core values and that's what they've been living into every day, they can adapt pretty quickly. And the ones that didn't want to adapt, we fully understood. And that being said, we were with our staff all along the way. Anybody that runs or any kind of company in a crisis situation should be reaching out to their staff every day. I mean, it went from every day to 3 times a week to twice a week, and now it's once a week. And just really finding out where people are at in their heads. And, if they're well, if there's anything they need. We provided financial assistance for some of our staff. We really became a beacon of kind of hope for them. And this was, having to, actually let them go, which was one of the hardest things we did.
Dwight, I heard something that I have not heard from my interactions as a retail center director. You said you provide them with financial assistance. Is this outside of the PPE program and stuff, or is this not?
Yeah, we set up right away, we set up a relief fund for the staff, and the public was allowed, our guests were allowed to contribute to it, and the owners of our company matched it. And that allowed us to give some people some funds that, otherwise would not have been present. And I personally was involved with a number of people in helping them get through it. But it's really important to identify and understand and practice core systems failures. And if you don't pull the plug on everything in your building one day and find out how to put it back together. We had to do that. Take your POS system down on purpose. Reach out to your suppliers and ask them, you know, what is it that would really hurt you, that if we did something, what is it would hurt you, you know? Because the suppliers, they're your lifeblood. I mean, you're going to need them back. And if you don't take care of them, you don't communicate with them, and think about the disruption that they're having to go through. There's food rotting in fields and people starving in this country because the supply chain was interrupted. And trying to figure out, that's probably one of the biggest takeaways for me, is that my ignorance around that and my inability to affect it directly, other than, you know, get open and buy some more food. I'm sure Paul can speak to that because he's had lots of experience in that world. But really being good with, you don't have all the answers. There's other people out there that are fighting, and it's okay. It's okay not to have all the answers, and it's okay to be a leader that says, I don't know. We're going to roll with it, and to really push yourself to being in uncomfortable positions, because if you're not risking enough to get any value out of the individual situation that's come up. Really understand that you're gonna come up against, and this is hard for us. We're gonna come up against people that aren't gonna be happy with how we're doing things, and that it is, you know, we're trying to figure it out as best we can. I think one of the things that I've been fortunate to be a part of is working with the government, both on a local and national level. Have somebody within your organization that understands how to walk through that, and who to talk to, and who to contact, and who's going to be your ally, and who's somebody that you're going to have to have conversations with. I think that really being the part of the community that people are proud of, and understanding that you can really help people get through things without even knowing that you're helping them, just by being a great example. I see there's 2 questions or 3 questions. I'll try and answer those, Rebecca. The best thing I can tell you about getting into the food and beverage industry is be ready for anything, because anything and everything happens in the industry. And I would tell you that when you find yourself in or with an organization that deeply cares, you won't work with better people. Restaurant people, production people in the food and beverage industry, we're the salt of the earth as far as I can tell. And we're very resilient. We're very giving. We're used to providing something that people need every day to them, and trying to create the understanding that that's what you're going to do. And if you don't like making people happy, and you don't like being around food and beverage, then don't even consider it. It's a very, very demanding industry, but it's a whole lot of reward in it. And then the second question was about digital marketing.
Right.
I don't think any restaurant out there could have survived this 10 years ago without the tools that the internet has provided. Our ability to get a menu in front of somebody in less than a day or less than an hour, if we needed to, that they could order from, and that we could get them that product, that didn't exist. And we pulled in all of the digital marketing that we could. We had a little bit of experience with it, but not nearly what we wanted. We also reached out to all of our staff. Another reason why the staff can be very, very helpful, and had them post and had them help us with the social marketing. I always joke that I opened my Twitter account when Twitter was not even a public company. I don't know how many years it was. And I just started utilizing it again. And really, like I said, I'm still in awe how the digital world made this survival possible. And it's something that should not be taken for granted. I think it's going to drive a lot of things even more.
And one more, Dwight, if I might interrupt, you talked about using a staff. What I found also interesting was that there were a lot of customers who were actually coming out and talking about their particular favorite restaurants, at least in my experience and my network. Hey, go support them. Did you find that also, like all of a sudden you had these evangelist customers who were actually talking a lot more about your company or set of companies and asking people to go to support them in ways possible?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The ability to you can donate a meal on our online platform, and we were providing those meals to first responders and then our company was matching them. And you would be surprised at how many people donated, were just so generous and so appreciative of the ability for them to do that, and that Great American was supporting it in such a big way. And I'm really not just trying to toot Great American's horn. This community that we live in is just awesome. Awesome.
I cannot. While we are taking questions, Justin, has been one specifically for you, and there's one for the entire panel. And Paul, maybe you can jump in as well with any of the questions, and then I'll segue to the last question we have for this whole session. So Justin, most popular product, and what's your personal favorite? I think we're all curious to know.
Well, most popular product is an easy one. That's our Ponzi, which is our West Coast IPA. I think in the craft beer world, something around 70% of the beer sold that is craft beer is IPA. Yeah. It's just a very, very popular style, and ours falls right in line with that trend. As far as my personal favorite, that's a much more complicated question. I get the question a lot of, what's your favorite beer? What's your favorite Atlas beer? And it really, beer to me is so much dependent upon the environment that you are in. Everything just from, the temperature outside or the season to if you're sitting on a dock versus, going on a hike or whatever it may be. So luckily there's a myriad of beer styles, and they all have their proper time and place. And so my favorite beer is sort of depends on where I am and who I'm with. And in terms of the question on, do you think curbside will continue once business resumes as normal? We talked about that briefly internally on the panel. And it's interesting because it's been a long period of time now, 75 days or whatever it's been, where people have sort of adapted to a new normal of being in their house and having everything that they want brought to them. There's certainly a huge convenience part of that. What the consumer demand will be on the other side of this, I think it will be around probably to a larger degree than it was pre-COVID, of course. And in my particular world, it's more interesting because in the alcohol world, we're in a very heavily regulated industry. Every state has their own liquor laws, sometimes down to the county or city level. And a lot of the laws in the alcohol world were built to prevent manufacturers from directly selling either to retailers or to consumers. And a lot of that has been wiped away in the interest of survival during this time. So it'll be interesting to see that the justifications that have been put out in the past from the middle layer of it in our system, the sky has not fallen without them being involved. And I think a lot of the legislators may look at that as well. I know in DC, there's already a lot of groundswell from the general population of making alcohol to home delivery legal permanently. So that's an indication that there is the demand out there for that. What happens on the legal side, we will see. But I think consumer expectations have absolutely changed after this long period of new processes.
Paul, would you like to add?
Yeah, let me just, I'll put my academic hat on for a few minutes and tell you a little bit about the history of this. This really started in a phrase that was called home meal replacement. Mm-hmm. And in the research, we'll find that it really gathered critical mass when Domino's started doing 30 minutes or less free delivery. That changed pizza from a snack food to an actual meal. And the numbers gained critical mass in a very short period of time. The other attributes that make transporting a fully prepared meal from a retailer to the home to be consumed, operating definition of home meal replacement or curbside or delivery or however else you want to look at it, was further advanced by demographics in the United States. We have more single parent households than we have in the history of the United States. Now, what that means is that adults with children are time poor. They are doing all of the work of two parents. So they're doing the grocery shopping, the dry cleaning, the parental taxi, daycare, all of those things that normally would be divided up between more than one person in a traditional 1950s, 1960s household. And this has created a need. How do you fill the gap? And so people said, I'm going to make time up by not cooking. But I want good, delicious, perceived as wholesome, homemade, from scratch food. So I'm going to start doing restaurant takeout. Then we saw in the 1990s, the early 2000s, chain restaurants cutting a hole in the side of their restaurant and putting in a window for curbside pickup. And that advanced home meal replacement even more. Even today, it is the fastest growing category of food service segment, is the home meal replacement. So in one sense of the word, it can be profitable for restaurants because there's less labor to provide a meal that goes in someone's car than to serve it in a dining room. There's a variable cost of labor that's not involved. Even though you might have some nominal packaging costs, but it will probably, it'll be interesting to see what happens through this experience of curbside and then, takeout as the primary source of revenue. How is that going to be factored into the future? The other thing is, from the consumer standpoint and the operator, is governments have realized this is another opportunity for taxation. For instance, if you look at Norfolk, Virginia, the city implemented a tax on all drive-through. It doesn't matter what restaurant. If you got your food through a drive-through, you were going to pay an additional, don't quote me on this, but I think it's 3%. That's a significant amount when your state rate is 6%. So the idea of it also opens up, more governmental reach into the retailer's efforts to piggyback on top of that. And so that also is something to be aware of. It's no secret. Other municipalities are looking at ways for revenue funds. They have lost a lot of money. Look at school systems. They're going to be looking for ways. Yep. And as you mentioned in the beginning, Gotham, with 13 million people, the food service industry is the second largest employer in the United States, right behind the United States government. We employ more headcount than any other industry in the country. So it makes us a target, but it also makes us very important to the economic cycle.
So I just looked at the time and I realized that we are probably running out of time. So this gives us it also, as usual, Paul, you gave us a nice segue into the last sequence of questions, which is the reopening, right? Now that I know in DC, the reopening has been pushed back to Friday, or last Friday, but now that you're going through the reopening phase, and we have a poll in progress, right? Do you plan to, do you think that the business model, and I think Paul was talking about this, could change moving forward? Is this curbside delivery or curbside or pickup, is that going to actually change the way businesses operate? Are they going to be profitable in that model? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Like, how is reopening going? And equally important, how is your industry going to change given these? So
I think from my perspective, and Dwight and Paul may be better to answer this question, so I'll be quick, but you're not going to be able to sustain a business, a restaurant business in the old model unless consumer preferences come back at the same level. I mean, restaurants are really based upon occupancy, and you've got to get a lot of people in there and turn them through in order to make the slim margins that exist in our industry. How long consumers take to build that confidence back up, or how long until it's safe to come in and pack a restaurant, I have no idea. And I also think whatever lasting changes come from here, there's going to have to be a real change in the real estate markets also. I think I'm starting to see that a little bit, that, you know, retail space isn't as valuable as it was 3 months ago. And I think that will continue. I think landlords may change the power dynamic a little bit away from landlords and a little bit more into the hands of restaurateurs and retail entrepreneurs.
That's interesting. So Justin, let me just quickly ask you one follow-up question. So for you, the tap room is very important, right? From a business generating, revenue generating model.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to change with all these and you just said customer changes, preferences are going to change dramatically. You know, do you see the tap room playing a similar role, like a convening space, or do you think you'll have to think on your feet again to reimagine the tap room?
That's an interesting question. I think the tap room portion of our business probably falls in line with the same concerns that a traditional restaurant is going to have. So, you know, are people going to be comfortable coming out? How can we open up more space or find outdoor space to host people? But I think the confidence level of consumers coming to a tap room versus a restaurant is probably going to be equivalent.
Interesting. Interesting times ahead. Dwight, anything to add to?
Yeah, I think the curbside, while it's definitely on the rise, and we were already gearing up for it. I mean, we resisted doing carry-out food for the longest time, but we realized that our guests wanted it, and we've moved into some of the third-party apps, and we're trying everything we can to utilize it. That being said, from a business standpoint, I just don't think it's a viable way to make money. There's a tremendous amount of competition in the space, because as Paul said, you can open up a ghost kitchen in a very small space, and you can compete with people that have large kitchens and large formats. I mean, we opened a bunch of ghost kitchens. So but you know, and then from a convenience standpoint, at some point in time, the financials around that are going to be pushed to the consumer. And does the consumer have the appetite for that? Don't know. I mean, these are different times, and people are testing the waters with it, and a lot of people are going to appreciate it. You know, certainly in our area, there are a lot of people with a very sizable disposable income, but we'll see what happens. You know, restaurants and restaurateurs are very resilient,
yeah.
And we'll figure it out. But it's not as bright as it looks, the whole carryout thing. And you know, but it is a great business. So.
And there was a lot of discussion about curbside being the main way forward. And so it's great that you shed light on the cost aspect. I think all three of you did that, and how that might not be sustainable, especially if you have a lot of ghost kitchens operating. And I see now more and more malls are actually using their space for ghost kitchens, which adds more competition. Paul, do you want to take the last thoughts and wrap things up for us? Paul, you're on mute.
There we go. Hey, no, I'm going to echo it. I mean, I think home meal replacement is going to continue because our lives are getting more complicated. And we're trying to, you know, I'm going to generalize that our lives in the United States and the way that we approach work, not only from the commerce side, but the social side in terms of our norms and the foundation of capitalism, is that we continue to get busier and busier. With the addition of technology in our lives, we are doing more than we ever have. And individuals are going to make choices on where to economize with their time in order to have the quality of life by their definition. And that means that there's always going to be a growth in home meal replacement. You know, look at grocery stores. You look at stores like Wegmans, Whole Foods, Publix down in the South, that they have more than 50% of their square footage now devoted to prepared foods.
Yeah.
That's a completely different paradigmatic shift in grocery retailing. And it begs the question, what's their core business now? Are they a grocer or are they a food service operator? So, I think it's going to be a question that we'll have future conversations about. And you have to look at what your core business model is. What are the core values of the business? And each individual company will stick with that. I know we're short on time, so I'll wrap it up with that.
Well, I wanted to, before I throw it up to Brett, let me thank all three of you. If you see me looking aside, it's been me taking notes. This has been very, very helpful. I also want to conclude with one thought, like what I've heard is resiliency and agility of the restaurant and food beverages sector. And I also think that the social aspect of humanity is going to always be there, and restaurants and breweries, Justin, are always going to be a place to gather around and have conversations around. And so while the way we do these things might change in the short term and maybe even in the long term, I think the future for restaurants as a convening space is always going to remain. And thank you for taking your time. It's been very, very helpful for me and hopefully to the audience as well. I appreciate it. Brett, it's yours now.
Awesome. So last comments and just once again to echo Gotham's point. So thank you to the panelists. This has been incredible for you to spend an hour of your time. I know you guys are all busy. So to be able to provide some feedback and some guidance to students, to alumni in this space, this is one that Gotham and I have talked about for a while. Most of our your great memories it's something involved with what you're eating, what you're drinking, and the social context, and that happens within restaurant, food, beverage, and we live our lives through this. One thing that came up in the pre-call between us that we want to echo is the restaurant and food beverage, it represents Mason and what Mason their ideals are. It's the most diverse industry. It supports the true color of the United States, and something that Mason is proud of, and something that we share and that we stand by. So once again, I do want to thank you three for joining, Gotham for moderating. Great content. For the audience, we'll have more of these coming up. So they're about 2 a week for the next couple of weeks, all focusing on different sectors. Gotham will probably join us again he will be joining us again for the retail one on June 17th. So with that, just wanted to say thank you again. Everyone stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say something really quickly to the listeners. If you need anything, as you all stated, use us as a resource. We love Mason. I should speak for myself. I shouldn't be speaking for Justin, but we will do anything we can to help any student or faculty member. So
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Drinks on the patio with Atlas Brewworks, and we'll get it going.
And we won't be where we are without you guys' support. So thank you again, not just for us, for all the students also.